live stream. Okay, here we are. Okay, everybody. Good morning and welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Today we're going to be talking about I don't remember which P words I ultimately used. The perils, the power, the problem, the all of the P words. Why would you attack higher education? Why in the world would you do that? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that with historical perspective. Oh, powers and perils. Okay. When I was redoing it, reposting it yesterday, I came up with other P words that could have worked too, but they all work. Sean says the P stupidity. There's that too. At any rate, that is what we're going to talk about today. Historically speaking, why have people done this? And what do they hope to gain by doing it? But before I do that, I turn to Addie. Now you guys are being really good. P insane. That's all the P words. My partner in crime, Annie, will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted as always to be with you here on a Friday morning. We're glad Joanne is back, feeling better this week. If this is your first time joining us, this is how it works. Joanne's going to talk about today's topic for about a half an hour. I'll be back after that. We will look for your questions down in the Q&A. We love it when you engage in the chat, but it goes by way too fast. So if you have a question about today's topic, I would love it if you would put that in the Q&A, and I will look for those in about 30 minutes.
Okay. And I will add to that, if you are new to History Matters, this is our 269th episode. I'm proud of myself. I never remember this. This is like two in a row that I've remembered. 269th episode. So if you say in chat that you are here for the first time or one of the first times, you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. Okay, so I want to talk about why in the world would people want to attack higher education? What does that get them? You would think it's counterproductive, right? You're fighting against knowledge. Even if you just look in the realm of science, which some people are prone to do, clearly us social science slash history slash humanities people would prefer not to just look at science. But even if you're just looking in the realm of science, um, you're handicapping in one way or another your own country. Maybe you're encouraging academics in your own country to go elsewhere. Maybe you're stymieing the spread and the growth, research spread of knowledge. Maybe you're going to be cutting down on innovations, medical innovations, technological innovations to come down the road. Maybe you'll ultimately be contributing to those things in other countries. Maybe you should just like the fact that you would have an educated populace, or maybe not. And that's what I want to talk about today. It seemingly would make no sense to attack higher education. But indeed, the reason why it makes sense is some of what I'm going to talk about today, which is that higher education has a power to it and contributes to other kinds of power. And just like education generally, when free and open, is a bolster to democracy, higher education contributes to that same encouragement of learning and thinking and researching and investigating and trying to get to the core roots of things in the hope of gaining new knowledge or improving things beyond where they are, right? That all sounds good. We're going to talk about why one would not want that. Now, as ever, I want to start out with the founding era because the founders, happily for us, were very specific and very clear in their understanding and in their statements that in a democratic republic, education was key. And I've talked about this before. They understood that in a democratic republic, people need to be able to interrogate ideas. They need to be able to understand history because historical examples show what dangers to republics look like. You need an educated populace to be able to recognize threats to the republic. Okay, that's one of their direct lines of knowledge was the people need to understand history. They need to be educated enough to see when tyranny is on the doorstep, dictatorship may be coming, when there may be threats to the republic, so that the people can rise up and protect their republic, their nation. That's the idea behind it. So you can already see from where I'm starting, one reason why authoritarian governments might really not be fond generally of education, but higher education, even more specifically, mix in with that simple spread of that kind of dangerous knowledge, social and political knowledge, mix in with that higher education also, there are institutions that sometimes have some power to them, if they're private institutions, that certainly have an elite of some kind, and often a liberal elite of some kind. So there are more reasons that higher education, and I should add to that, of course, being one of them, right? There are faculty at these institutions who know things and who say things and write things and try to spread ideas. Ooh, we can't have certain ideas spreading. And faculty are dangerous people and need to be maybe not entirely silenced at first, but calmed down, sort of, encouraged not to speak so loudly or not to say certain things. So, at any rate, the founding generation understood very clearly that a Republican government, a government grounded on the people, on public opinion, not a monarchy, not a government that is based on one powerful person, but a government that is grounded on the people, and the people put people in power and take them out of power. So it's us. Any kind of government grounded on the people needs the people to be educated. And universities and colleges are part of that system, not only in in partly helping to create that educated populace, and then in addition to that, um, creating people who can voice and state and write and spread different kinds of ideas, encourage people to think and interrogate things they see around them. Interestingly, this morning, I tried to get on, and I've mentioned this resource before. I tried to get on Founders Online, which is through the National Archives. They basically, it's the papers of Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, Washington, like the the biggies, some of the major founding figures. And their letters, their writings are there and are word searchable. It's actually an amazing tool. So I mentioned it before, I mentioned it again because particularly when you hear people spouting founder knowledge, you can go to that website and you can do searches and start to see if this quote comes anywhere near anything in reality, and often they don't. But at any rate, it's a great resource. And for some reason, uh, today and a few days ago as well, I can't get in. It's not working. It says page not found. Now, when I opened it today and tried to use it, the front page, the front URL that came up, and it said on poor performance in May, which I couldn't open. So I'm not saying this is all an evil plot, but I am saying that for certain amount of time this week, I have not been able to get into Founders Online. I did find a quote that I want to read you here, which I probably wouldn't have found on Founders Online because his papers aren't there, but it will give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is from 1783, and it's from Noah Webster, who was a Federalist and was very focused on the English language and Americanizing the English language and Americanizing knowledge in one way or another through all kinds of things. I find the whole way he thinks really fascinating. It's a really interesting field of study. But at any rate, this is what he says in 1783. Quote, in despotic governments, the people should have little or no education, except what tends to inspire them with a servile fear. Information is fatal to despotism. In monarchies, education should be partial and adopted to the rank of each class of citizens, right? Don't want to upset the hierarchy. But in a Republican government, the whole power of education is required. Here, every class of people should know and love the laws. That's a great quote, right? In a despotic government, there should be little or no education except what will make people have a kind of servile fear. In a monarchy, people should be educated to understand their place in society. In a Republican government, the whole power of education is required because here, the people should know and love the laws. That kind of sets it out right there. Now, many moons ago, I think in the early days of History Matters, I talked briefly about the Federalist Party in this founding era and how when they began to lose political control, they tried to gain it back culturally by grabbing at cultural tools. And one of the things that they very much wanted was control of, in some way or another, universities. They weren't in power. So one of the ways in which they tried to do that, and this is what I was looking for this morning and could not find for you, but it's out there, is that there's correspondence. And I think I want to say that Alexander Hamilton even was asked about it or something. He was in the mix. At any rate, I haven't looked at this for decades, but out there, I believe there is correspondence between leading Federalists about the fact that they need to be thinking about who is the president of Columbia University, which was King's College, now it's Columbia. Who is going to be the new president, or who should be president, or should they put in a new president? It was correspondence about how they need to focus on who's the president of that university because who is the president could determine what's being taught there, could be determined what that institution is doing. And I would have loved to delve into that for you this morning. And there's a database I could have used through Yale that I could not get into without a somewhat of a length of time. But at any rate, I encourage you to look this up. Uh, it's making my point for me, which is that if you are trying to get political power for the Federalists, get it back for a despotic government, keep it whether or not the people want it to be there, then you want to control higher education in some way or another. Now, let's get down to specifics here. What do you get when you attack higher education? What are the reasons why, in addition to just, power and control, what are the specific things that you are doing or that you think you're doing or that you want to do when you attack higher education? Okay, so certainly one thing, a pretty clear thing, is that you are silencing or intimidating often a liberal elite, and you are probably hoping to create a more conservative elite. So in one way or another, it isn't necessarily about stopping elitism. It is about the right elites with the right ideas. So certainly you want to get into those kinds of channels of intellectual power and social power, and have people be spouting very specifically what you want them to spout. So that's part of it, is to shape a new elite of people who are going to conform to what you want them to say and do, and who will support whatever political regime it is that you want them to support. Number two, also obvious but very much worth saying, is that resistance to authoritarian, oppressive regimes is often born of universities, often born of institutions that foster threatening things like open expression, free thinking, interrogating things that are said to you and deciding, evaluating for yourself what they mean. That all of those things, resistance, interrogation of ideas, universities, traditionally speaking, they help to encourage that because they are not, despite all of the claims to the contrary, they're not about rote thinking and channeled thought, right? What I am, and anyone who is here as a teacher is trying to do is encourage students to think for themselves. That's the whole enterprise, right? That's what we're trying to do. So, at any rate, creating a new conservative elite, stamping out resistance, which again, universities are doing that through faculty, through students, any number of ways, but these are people who are empowered to resist and they have the intellectual heft and the historical precedent behind them to help support what they're saying. Related to this, if you can attack institutions of higher education, ideally you can put that into your agenda to create an authoritarian friendly population, right? And people who believe the right ideas and understand what's right and what's wrong and understand the scary thoughts that are scary thoughts and that should not be taught, like gender studies, for example. Oh, the bad ideas. We don't want people thinking about things like gender. And so you create in one way or another an authoritarian friendly population that likes a certain kind of government, doesn't like a certain kind of government, is not allowed to or does not believe they should follow certain paths of thought or interrogation for themselves. So in one way or another, there's a sort of ground level political component, very obviously, to attacking higher education. Uh, whether in part it's about de-weaponizing, is that a word? Taking away, I want to say defanging. It's about taking away the power of people who are likely to resist. It's about encouraging people who are likely to spread whatever ideological agenda you want to spread. It's a double whammy, and it can seemingly, if depending on how it's framed, not necessarily look political if you're not thinking too hard, right? Oh, universities, um, they're anti-Semitic. We should really control universities because there's anti-Semitism everywhere. And so we need to stamp it out. And to do that, we need to control lots of things. I'm not denying that there's anti-Semitism at all. I'm Jewish. I understand that. But right now, there are things like that that are being used as a mask for an attempt to just get power over universities. A quote that was in the news this last week, lest you think I'm being paranoid or inventing ideas here. On CNBC this last week, excuse me, Linda McMahon said, quote, universities should continue to be able to do research as long as they're abiding by the laws and in sync, I think, with the administration and what the administration is trying to accomplish. Now, think about that statement. Universities should be able to continue to do research as long as they're in sync with the administration and what the administration is trying to accomplish. That is not what higher education is about. It is not about supporting the agenda of party power. We could might be a good idea for another episode someday, maybe soon, about we've talked about this before. I'm always playing a game between trying to remember what we've talked about, how long it's been since we've talked about it with all of those episodes, but propaganda is another interesting idea that one could talk about. But at any rate, the idea that education at universities can only be in sync with the administration is beyond alarming, beyond anti-democratic, hyper authoritarian. Every alarm bell in the world, at least all of the alarm bells in my head went off when I heard that statement. That's a statement about trying to get control over higher education for the good of one particular political agenda. Now, I last week was trying to figure out a way to say this in writing. Briefly, I was going to respond to the statement in one way or another on social media, and then I just didn't, in part because I was sick. But just a reminder that one of the reasons why tenure exists in institutions of higher education is so that faculty can research and pursue interests that are research interests that are not necessarily popular with the college administration, that are not necessarily popular with the country that administration, the political administration, which normally doesn't control what universities are doing anyway. But tenure is in part to allow professors to look at things that might be unpopular or might take a long time to research. Tenure is about giving, it's not about evil elite power for faculty like now they'll have power forever. It's about enabling people like me to follow where my questions are taking me, to research what I want to research without worrying that what I'm doing might be unpopular and lose me my job. Any junior faculty member at any university would probably tell you that before you have tenure, whatever it is that you're doing, some part of your brain is thinking, okay, can I finish this quickly enough that it will matter and people will see that I'm working hard? Is there some way in which my doing this is going to lead me down a path that I don't know, maybe there'll be trouble. Do I care about that? I don't know, but the thought will cross my mind. I couldn't have written a book that took me 17 years to write as my first book. I couldn't. I would not get tenure because I need to keep churning and producing and doing what needs to be done to get tenure so that then I can research and investigate what I want. That's second half of that equation. That's what higher education is supposed to be encouraging, right? And that's what I and any other faculty member is trying to do for their students. Encourage them to get the tools to think for themselves, to interrogate things for themselves, to research things themselves, to understand, generally speaking, the patterns of history so that they can begin to understand how we got to the present and what that means, who we are, and what that suggests about what we're doing now, right? All of these things, how can I not say knowledge is power? Knowledge is power. And if you are trying to institute some kind of an authoritarian regime, you're not going to like that kind of power spreading in ways that are not friendly to you. So all of these things are part of what I wanted to say this morning. The first half of the equation being that from the beginning of the Republic, people understood that in a republic and a government grounded on the people, that education is key because you have to educate people to understand what they own and what they can do and what others can't do. It's a form, it's social knowledge, but it's political knowledge. And if knowledge supports people with power, well, if the American people have power, then they should definitely be knowledgeable enough to understand what their power is and how to fend off people who want to take it away from them. So that's the larger point I wanted to make this morning because obviously we're seeing more and more and more in the news of various ways in which there are attempts to stamp down, silence, intimidate institutions of higher education. Columbia was, as a matter of fact, I saw this morning a quote, someone will be able to find it for me, a quote that did not come from the administration, but came from someone on the right that said, that early on, it's useful to find, quote unquote, a prize scalp. That's the phrase, meaning to attack something as like an example. Prize scalp. Let's go for them. And that's really offensive in many ways, but besides that, prize scalp as a way to show people, intimidate people, silence people, and that the idea in what I was reading this morning is at Columbia University was that. Right now, then Harvard became another one. Harvard now is suing the administration. Harvard is standing up. And I saw maybe yesterday footage at Harvard's commencement exercises of the entire group of people in the audience standing up and giving the president a standing ovation for standing up to demands being made to stifle and silence and control Harvard University. So this is the combination of factors. This is the dynamic of trying to control higher education. This is why it's vitally important to defend freedom of thought, freedom of speech. Think about the Bill of Rights, folks. There's a reason why freedom of speech, besides the right to assemble, there's a reason why these things are there. They are the core, the essence of democratic governance. And that's why they're attacked by folks who aren't necessarily really keen on democratic governance. And one key reason why democratic governance becomes a bad thing for some people is democratic governance is grounded on contests for power. And people lose and win contests. You can't always win a contest. If you believe that you can never lose an electoral contest, if you believe that all elections naturally are yours, and that if someone else wins an election, somehow that's an illicit election, you're not friendly to democracy at that point. So for all of these reasons, what we're seeing now isn't just, which in and of itself is big, but isn't just an attack on the intellectual elite. It's an attack on, in essence, the power base of free thought and open speech, which is a power base of democracy, which can be a force for resistance. All of this is part of what we're seeing now in this ongoing attempt to get universities to kowtow, to bully them into shutting up, to scare faculty into not saying things, to make it so that there is a administration friendly intellectual climate on campuses that will then encourage the populace and the nation to follow along in a like manner. That is not democracy. Okay. Oh, look at that. 10:30, right on the mark. Okay. I am now going to show you. So for those of you who have not been here before, um, uh, every week when we do this, I have a mug that in some way, topical coffee container, thank you, David, that in some way reflects what we're talking about. And this one does, if you follow me for just a moment. But yeah, if someone is here for the first time, you should definitely tell folks in chat. I think Dale gave me this mug, and I don't know if I've used it before. So if Dale is here, you can tell me that. And if I've used it before, you can tell me that. It's an educated bunny.
I remember seeing that one, but it's adorable.
Dale gave it to me because Benjamin Bunny was my nickname for the person who was at the heart of my last book.
I remember that.
So
Hails from Williamsburg, so that's perfect.
it's right. So I think it's got to be Dale. Dale, you could tell us actually, and I can open chat now so that I can find that out for myself. But anyway, I don't think I've.
Oh, Dale's here.
Dale is here. Okay, so Dale could tell us. At any rate, so this is an educated founder bunny who is reading and writing as a smaller Republican citizen ought to. That is my mug for the week. Um, when did I get sick? I got sick a week ago, someone asked. I missed last week, and I'm so sorry for that. I hate to miss.
No, we totally wanted you to take care of yourself. That's
At any rate,
more
okay.
important.
So that is today's topical. All carrots are created equal. You guys are like,
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
okay.
All right, I am sure we have a million things going on in the Q&A over here. So let me open that up. Take a good swig of coffee. Oh, okay. So Cynthia and I were thinking alike because I was making comments in the chat about this. So Cynthia wants to know, Joanne, if you have an opinion about the Yale professors going to the University of Toronto.
Um, do I have an opinion? Uh, I think that the professors that did that are professors who certainly would be targeted. Uh, I'm not saying that is or isn't a reason to, but that certainly there is no question that those three people who are loud and have been speaking against tyranny for a long time, they would be targeted. In the cases of some of those people, I think they already were thinking about going there, and then they have now decided to go there, and so the complication of this is they're all being accused of running particularly Tim Snyder, who has said, never surrender, and he's being accused of surrendering. And I don't think it's that simple. I do think that they're leaving is a powerful statement. And I do think that people of all kinds understand what that means. I don't think that people will necessarily see that and think what that means is that I should no longer say anything or stand up for anything. I think, it's in one way or another suggests uh, a fear of, for example, what Tim Snyder writes about, tyranny. So right. So Linda says Tim went from where that he could fight from there, which is part of what he said. There you go. That Tim, is my understanding, and I haven't read everything that he's been saying or writing, but my understanding is Tim and his wife Marcy, sure, were already there before the election and have been, teaching there. So it wasn't as though the election happened and then they both like fled. So the dynamics of this matter too. But at any rate, I don't condemn them for that at all. I don't. I think part of what is happening right now, a natural result of what is happening right now would certainly be two things, would be for people to think about, academics to think about, do they, particularly in fields like science, where, funding is getting fully eliminated in ways that just totally stop what they want to do, might make people think about, do they want to stay here and do what they've devoted their lives to doing, or might they go somewhere else that's more friendly to it? These are the kinds of moments when other nations can sweep in and take American academics away, right? And say, well, you guys, you're, potentially endangered. You're certainly not being supported by this administration. Maybe you want to come here. So anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying I understand why they did what they did. It's not like they heard the results of the election and fled. I know that obviously the fact that you asked that question, people understand what that means. And the meanings of what they've done are really important to think about. So I guess I'll stop there. That's what I think.
Okay. Deb and Paul are with us again. They're some of our favorite folks here. They were curious. They said one of President Trump's riffs is he's been seen to say, I love the poorly educated. Do you think that's just him being him, or is it a recognition of the point that you were making here this morning?
Wow. I mean, I won't make a pronouncement on that only because, good historian that I am, I do remember that he has said that. I don't remember when and where. So I can't comment very specifically on it, but I certainly will say the poorly educated might not be as quick to pick up on lies. Just speaking generally, tossing that out there. Education, knowledge is power. It gives you independence of thought. It enables you to evaluate things for yourself. That's what we should all be doing. That's what we should all have the power to do.
All right. Jacqueline Hauptman asked, is there a historical precedent for denying visas to students from other countries?
Oh, thank you, because I did want to say this before. Even broader than that. I Not only are universities under attack, but then foreign students generally, right? If you're thinking in an unfriendly manner, if you've said something bad on social media, students generally, in a sense, you could say they're a soft target and an easy target because they don't necessarily, have lots of legal power behind them. Foreign students are not in their own country. And yet by attacking them, you're getting into these universities and getting into the student body in ways that are making students have the same kinds of fears that faculty and administrations of colleges and universities have. I find there are many things these days that I find reprehensible. This one I find particularly reprehensible as a teacher, to intimidate students, to yank. So one of the things that, again, I read and I didn't look up for this conversation, so I will say that the details of this, maybe I'm getting them slightly wrong, I don't know, but that Chinese foreign students from China that and actually just generally students are going to be when they apply for visas that they're going to have their social media accounts investigated to see what they've said. Right. So this is what I heard. This is, policing thought. This is sort of attacking other countries and asserting American power by smacking at students. And it's worth saying, foreign students who come to the United States sometimes are a source of finance for universities. They are not always covered by the same kinds of scholarships or fellowships that American students are. So in clamping down on international students coming to universities, in addition to all of the ways in which it's attacking universities and intellectual freedom and trying supposedly to smack at other countries. It is also a funding smack, right? It's a way in which universities get some funding. And so it's another reason to attack that as well. I just find it reprehensible. Attacking universities and knowledge is reprehensible. Doing that by using students as pawns, as political pawns, um, I can't even tell you how angry that makes me on behalf of the students. Um, I don't know if that answered the question, but I'm beside myself. I'm so outraged at picking that kind of target. Bad enough to attack universities, bad enough to attack just pursuing knowledge, bad enough to try and intimidate administrations and faculty from saying and thinking what they want to think. Now let's just make people scared to just want to learn. Let's just attack the students who are just here to read and think. And let's attack them and do it in scary ways, like grabbing them off the street, wearing masks, so that students will be, scared into compliance on any number of levels. I find this reprehensible.
Yeah. Okay, so Ellen says that in Cambodia, and she's referencing the movie The Killing Fields, the regime there suppressed education to an extreme degree. What are the differences between what happened then and what we are seeing now?
The difference between
When she talked about in Cambodia, um,
uh,
when they suppressed education.
as far as the regime, as far as other countries doing this.
Right.
So one of the things I read this morning, and I encourage you to do, and you can find it in any number of different ways, but and her name and her face have been all over the place. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who wrote a book called Strong Men, I think. And it has a chapter apparently on resistance that is specifically about universities and higher education. I read an essay by her this morning, which I will not be able to tell you where I found it, but it was very useful along these lines. It might be on her Substack, now that I think about it, in which she talks specifically about some of the things that I was talking about here. Maybe that Tim maybe even just posted it, but yes, so it
I'm
must
getting to it.
bam, of course you guys did. But at any rate, she writes about this, I think, in a really useful, concrete kind of way. So I would encourage you to actually track her down online, her writings.
We've got lots of links now in the chat.
That's good.
All right, our good buddy Dave asks, what, if any, is there a connection between the Trump tariff, I can't say this, the Trump tariff tantrum that is problematic, but appears to have a goal of America first or America alone? So he's wondering, is there a connection between these tariffs and the attack on Harvard or higher ed that has an effect of driving academics to leave the U.S.? Are the tariffs part of this? I think is what he's asking. America alone seems a pretty dangerous
Well,
path.
America alone is dangerous and actually foolish in a real world where countries have long helped each other in various ways, and countries that are democracy friendly have stood strong against countries that are not. So America alone is not a savvy way to move forward. But are the tariffs, Trump tariff tantrum is like that, right? A tongue twister. Are the tariffs part of this sort of attack on higher education? Not necessarily, but I think it's the same impulse. And I do think, the it's a way of bullying in addition to whatever economic impact they're supposed to have or not supposed to have, and doesn't appear that they were thought through very well. Regardless of all of that, it's a bullying technique, right? In that sense, I'll say there's some similarity. The bullying, stepping forward and doing something extreme, whether you are allowed to do it or not, asserting it, claiming it, throwing lots of extreme language out there about it, that's bullying. That's the kind of language and behavior that I talked about in my last book. That the Southerners, to maintain power, even though they weren't necessarily demographically always going to maintain power, one of the ways in which they defended the institution of slavery was to be bullying towards Northern members and anti-slavery members of Congress. So they were very obvious with their weapons. They threatened to challenge people to duels. They were insulting and dared these Northerners to say something back because they might end up fighting a duel. They were using threats and violence to silence their opposition. And it worked really well because a lot of people chose, members of Congress, Northern members of Congress, chose to just not stand up and walk into literally the line of fire. That can work, right? Bullying can have a real power. So bullying in higher education is part of what we're seeing. Bullying as far as the rest of the world goes, the rest of the world goes with the tariffs, like, ooh, look at us, we can control everyone, we can control everything. Not so much, but I think that was part of the impulse. So in that sense, I would say that the general idea of doing something or saying something extreme as a way to seem like a, strong man bullying force, that's a connecting thread throughout history with people who are trying to make grabs at power.
All right. Um, Barbara asks, not sure if the founders considered a fascist becoming a president. They certainly put in the checks and balances, but maybe didn't think that an entire side of Congress would ever all support a fascist leader. So the SCOTUS affirming the POTUS with full immunity, here we are with a president pardoning criminals on a daily basis. Do you think the founders accounted for such a possibilities of a rogue president?
Well, I think, excuse me, I think the number one fear, it's always important to say the sort of elite founder folk um, wanted a smaller Republican government, even a Democratic Republican nation. They were not all democracy happy. They didn't necessarily want, whoo-hoo, give the people power. That was not something they were necessarily comfortable with. They wanted a government that enabled people to have power, and then they wanted, sort of fences and gates around it so that there was a certain amount of control. And now I've totally lost track of the question. You have to repeat it for me, Annie.
No worries. And if you're not feeling well, we don't have to keep going. Like, don't
I'm a little hazy, but I want to keep going. But
say. Asking, did the founders account for the possibility of having a president
right.
that leaned towards fascism and also having a Congress that allowed them to do so?
They wouldn't have been thinking necessarily about fascism, but they certainly were thinking about demagoguery and the similarity. And if Founders Online through the National Archives is up and running at some point, just go and search on demagoguery. You might have to try a few different spellings since they're creative with their spelling back then. But regardless, they were because they were democracy nervous. And one of the vulnerabilities in a democracy is that the people can be swayed by their emotions easily, that the people aren't always governed by knowledge, but sometimes are just moved in different directions, not based on logic. That for that reason, demagogues have a particular importance. They are particularly dangerous. And that's what they talk about all the time, meaning that someone can put themselves in the public eye, say anything that the public wants them to hear to get power, can appeal to the public, pander to the public, do whatever they need to do to get the public emotionally invested in them so that they can get political power. And then once they get political power, they can do whatever the heck they want. And history, again, the founding generation was a very history-minded generation. They studied republics in ancient history and said, this is the pattern. This is how republics fall. They fall to demagogues. This is so if you want to, if someone really hated someone in this period, they'd find a way to call them a demagogue. That was the number one fear. So not necessarily fascism, but that idea of somebody getting power for the sake of power and then doing whatever they wanted once they had that power, that's underlying their fear of a demagogue as well. They didn't necessarily assume, they certainly didn't assume that people of any kind, including people with political power, would behave well all the time and do the right thing all the time. I mean, this last semester in my Hamilton and Jefferson course, we studied how Hamilton thought that there should be a strong government that would channel human emotions because people are just never going to be good. Like they're just never, people have passions, right? You can't count on people to behave well, so you have to put channels in place, and that's part of what um, governed his line of thinking. So the checks and balances in the Constitution are certainly there. And yes, Clinton, I didn't say that, but that is true that fascist is not also not, that's a modern idea, modern word, above and beyond the general idea. But the, oh, there we go. Someone just said you can get into Founders Online, but it's erratic. At any rate, the founders, all the checks and balances, they certainly put in place thinking that would check and balance power. Did they imagine that there would be huge groups of people who would choose not to use their power that they had? They certainly did not assume that what they were creating was going to work forever without tweaking. They certainly didn't assume that what they created was going to stay in the exact same form that it stayed forever. Um, Something happening outside my door. At any rate, um, you know, whether they certainly, given that when they created the Constitution, they didn't anticipate political parties either, there are many ways in which they couldn't have put themselves in the present situation. But the larger question, did they understand and believe that there were any number of different ways in which things could be warped, and so that the balance of power in every sense of the word could be warped? Yeah, they understood that. But as Thomas Jefferson said, after the election of 1800, when someone said, what would you have done if violence had broken out during the election? He's like, well, we would have had to have a convention and then examine the Constitution and see where it went wrong and tweak it and then go back. That's kind of how their logic worked. Oh, the noise that I'm hearing is
No, somebody mentioned earlier that Rosie had a lot to say today.
she did, and now she's throwing birdseed around. So that was what I heard.
Okay, I'm afraid to ask this question, Cynthia. Cynthia wanted to know if you had considered leaving.
Oh, um, no. I mean, have I done anything to in pursuit of leaving? Have I, contacted universities and said, "Hey, I have not." Um, that's as far as I could go. I have not made that gesture. I think most faculty would seriously consider offers being made by other countries. Just speaking generally, I think, it is a prime time for other countries to step forward and say, hey, now, of course, the other part of that is that democracy is under attack all over the world. So it's not as though there are all kinds of places to go where you're going to feel safe. Canada is one. But there's a reason why, you don't have to go looking to leave for other countries and other universities to understand that this might be a cherry picking moment, generally speaking, for American faculty. And I have no idea what any academics would say to that, but I would hazard to guess that most of them would consider that kind of an offer really carefully.
Yep. Okay, Freda wanted to know, how do those of us outside of academia support the independence of educational institutions? That's a great question.
Yeah, so how could people outside of academia support the independence of institutions of higher or education, learning, or just education generally? I mean, education generally,
At academia. So I think in this particular question, she was leaning towards the higher ed piece.
yeah. Um, I mean, that's a good question about what to do. And I don't know if I'm having an instant um, answer to that. So, do you have a thought, Annie? Annie?
Well, one thing is, I mean, this is always part of it is donating, because so many funds for research and projects have been defunded. I would say if you are able, if you're in a position to be able to donate, this is a good time.
Now that's tricky, of course, because on the one hand, you have attempts to defund institutions. On the other hand, institutions like Harvard and Yale do have vast amounts of money. And so that's a tricky thing. I understand that that's a tricky thing. I think if you're not, an Ivy League institution, you're not going to have that barrier of people thinking you don't need my money anyway. I do think that that's a really good point, generally speaking, for all educational institutions, all universities, all academic institutions right now can use support of all kinds, including Ivy League institutions. And financial donations are certainly one way you can do that. I think, there are any number of ways. There are cultural ways, if you are a writer, you could write in support of academic freedom. If you are a singer or an artist, you could create art or songs that support. You could stage a defense of higher education, of the freedom to learn, using all tools at your disposal if you wanted to. And if you did that, and you got the American people engaged in understanding what that freedom means and what its absence means. And if you were using culture to help enforce that message, that could have a real power. Because part of what we're looking at now is a moment when people need to come together and really stand up and push back because we're not going to have the ability to do that forever if we don't offer as a group resistance and cultural resistance, using all tools that are available to us to say this is what we think, we writ large, this is what we believe in, this is what we think is important, and thus this is why that is in our to us anti-democratic, authoritarian, whatever. There are lots of different kinds of tools. Like, for example, having a webcast on a Friday morning. There are lots of different tools that you could use to support just the general task of higher education. We could have teach-ins. Have we had teach-ins? I don't think we've had any. But I remember talking.
The
uh,
Institute of Common Power down in Florida, I know Dr. Jeffries and Yahoo Williams have been involved with those.
I
They
tried
did
to.
a session at NCHE, I think.
I was. That's right.
They
Well,
did a teach-in,
MCG,
24-hour teach-in, if I seem to remember it, over the winter.
I was in Trump's first administration. I was trying to organize some kind of national teach-in thing that started a little bit, and then and it came, and that was the end of that. But anyway, I would say think imaginatively, think broadly of all the different ways in which you can step forward and talk about intellectually as well as in the realm of freedom, what you believe in.
So we have 3 minutes left. Martha wanted to know what leverage Trump has over these universities to think he can tell them what to do. I mean, other than funding, that's been the biggest one, right?
Well, funding, and there's two halves to the answer. One is he can say a lot of things. Can he do these things? Well, that's a separate question. He can threaten to change, to make universities, private universities, that they're going to be taxed in a different way, right? That now they're going to be taxed that before they were nonprofit institutions, so they weren't being taxed in a certain way. He's claiming, I think, or has certainly threatened that one of the things he can do is to change the nonprofit taxation status of universities. Funding is, generally speaking, funding is powerful. I mean, there are some universities are lucky enough to have a lot of money. That doesn't mean that they don't need money to keep going and that they don't basically rely on private money to keep going. So that is a powerful way to smack at universities. And the other power or another, not even the other, another powerful way is to intimidate not just administrations, but certainly administrations, but to intimidate faculty into not wanting to speak up. Um, and that's we have not seen that in full force yet. But that certainly is another way in which administrations that want to be authoritarian can try to grab at power by silencing resistance to it.
So this is the final question. We actually cleared the deck.
All right.
Susan wanted to know what animals should represent the Republican Democratic parties now if we were to replace the elephant and the donkey. I personally think maybe the donkey needs to be swapped out for the other side right now because they're kind of acting,
I,
I'm not going to say
I,
it because it's a family show, but maybe just like the Democratic Party switched at one point in history, the Democrat Republicans, maybe we should switch the donkey over to the other side and we should go with, I don't know, a kangaroo or something.
I won't make a specific suggestion here. What I will say is it's a perfect example of what I said before, just a few moments ago, which is using culture to make strong political statements. And that question is certainly an example of that. If you're saying like, the this party is no longer, you know, symbolized by this animal, but now instead will be this. If you're spreading that kind of a message and it catches on, it goes viral, then yeah, that can have a kind of power to it. I'm not gonna venture into the realm of stating what I think each party should be, because that's like the most partisan thing I could possibly do, and we're not sort of here,
Or not.
playing
No.
politics at all. But it's a
I'm
good.
laughing at Miriam with a Y. We have two Miriams, Miriam with an I and Miriam with a Y. It's hard to keep them straight, but we love both of them. But Miriam with a Y said the ostrich because they're sticking their head in the sand. That's a pretty good one.
I think there's so many animals that would lend
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
on slides. Okay, so let me explain what's going to happen now. So now we're going to go to the after party. And what that means is that we will no longer be recording. Thank you. I'm getting a little poof there. We are no longer going to be recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation than we were before. We could talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are. And as everyone is saying in chat, poof, you will be in the after party. If bird poof, if you're on Facebook, if you're watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too will be in the after party. As I say every week, thank you for coming and engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. Thank you for being so such a community at a time when community matters so much, and an intellectual community at that, an educational community at that. Um, Everyone, stay aware, generally speaking, but certainly watch, given that we are here through the National Council for History Education, continue to watch what's going on with attacks on higher education, because that's not going to go away. It's going to get worse. And the question is how, and what kind of resistance works. The courts and suing the administration, there are all kinds of checks and balances that one can use. At any rate, thank you for being here, everybody. Be safe. I think there's a lot of COVID out there right now, and even though we may not be being told anymore, uh, it's out there, as I can vouch. So take care of yourself and be healthy, because we all need to be rested and ready for whatever comes at us in the coming week. Okay. And am I forgetting to say something? I'm a little hazy. I think I've said everything.
Good. We'll just wait for Claire to do her magic.